Welcome back to the Brit Lit Book Club. I'm Vanessa, and today we're talking about J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. I have to tell you what prompted this episode, because it's one of my favorite things about doing this podcast. The way literature keeps showing up in your real life if you pay attention. My kids are currently in a production of Peter Pan, and watching them in rehearsals, seeing them fall in love with this story, I found myself asking the question I always eventually ask. Who was the person behind this? What happened to them, and what made them dream up a flying boy who refuses to grow up? The answer stopped me cold, because J.M. Barrie didn't invent Peter Pan out of pure whimsy. He invented him out of grief. And once you know that, you can never quite watch the story the same way again. Now, I could not do an episode about Peter Pan without the most perfect tea pairing that I've ever stumbled across. My absolute favorite tea shop in all of England is Bird & Blend, which if you haven't discovered yet, please go immediately. They have locations across the UK, and they ship internationally, and I may or may not have a slight problem when I walk through their doors. They make a tea called fairy dust. It's a Chinese green tea with freeze-dried peaches, rose petals, sunflower petals, and actual sprinkles. It brews up this gorgeous golden color and tastes like something that belongs in a story, peachy, floral, delicate, and just a little bit whimsical. I'll link the tea in the show notes for you. Now, what if I told you that the most beloved children's story in the English language, the one about a magical boy who flies through nursery windows and takes children to an island where they never have to grow up, was written by a man who never recovered from watching his mother grieve? What if I told you that Peter Pan, the boy who doesn't want to grow up, was born directly from a real boy who never got the chance to? Grab your tea. This one starts with the funeral. J.M. Barrie is one of those writers people think they know. Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, Neverland, The Lost Boys, The Crocodile with the Clock. It's all so familiar, so woven into the fabric of childhood, that we forget to ask where it came from. Who dreamed this up, and why? The answer, as it turns out, is both more beautiful and more heartbreaking than anything in the story itself. Because Peter Pan isn't really about childhood. It's about grief. It's about a mother who couldn't let go, and a son who spent his entire life trying to become someone else, and 5 little boys in a London park who became the inspiration for one of the most enduring stories ever told. It's also rather wonderfully a deeply Scottish story, and if you've been listening to this podcast for the last few episodes, you know that Scottish stories are very close to my heart. So let's begin. James Matthew Barrie was born on May 9th, 1860, in Kirriemuir, a small weaving town in the county of Angus, in the Scottish Highlands. He was the 9th of 10 children in a working-class family, and by all accounts, a perfectly ordinary Scottish boy, curious, imaginative, small for his age. And then, when James was 6 years old, his world collapsed. His brother, David, 13 years old, the family's golden child, their mother's favorite, went ice skating with friends on a frozen pond. There was an accident, and David never came home. His mother, Margaret, was devastated, in a way that went beyond ordinary grief. She retreated. She stopped engaging with the world. She poured everything that remained of her into the memories of David. The boy who had been perfect, the boy who would never disappoint her, the boy who was forever 13. And young James, small, quiet, desperate to comfort his inconsolable mother, made a decision. He would become David. He began wearing David's clothes. He learned David's favorite whistles. He tried to walk the way David had walked. He slipped into his mother's darkened room and became, as best he could, the ghost of his dead brother. His mother slowly began to talk again. And what she talked about most was David. How wonderful he had been, how he would always be 13 now, never older, never changed, forever her golden boy. It was Margaret Barrie who first said it, the boy who would never grow up. James spent his entire childhood in that shadow, trying to be David for his mother, trying to earn the love that seemed to flow so much more easily toward a dead brother than a living one. And somewhere in that childhood, and all of that grief and longing and imagination, Peter Pan was born. Barrie went to Edinburgh University, one of the finest in the world, and from there he made his way to London to become a writer. He was, by this point, a young man of decidedly distinctive appearance. He barely topped 5 feet tall, with enormous dark eyes and a slightly otherworldly quality that people found either charming or unsettling, depending on their own disposition. He wrote novels and plays with modest success. he married an actress named Mary Ansell in 1894. By most accounts, it was a marriage of genuine affection, and also, by most accounts, a marriage that was never fully a marriage in the conventional sense. Barrie appears to have been simply uninterested in the physical dimensions of matrimony, which was bewildering for Mary and eventually fatal for the marriage. She left him in 1909 for a younger man. Barrie was reportedly more baffled than devastated. What he was, genuinely and deeply, was interested in children, not in any sinister sense, but in a way of someone who has essentially never finished being one. He was endlessly playful, inventive, imaginative. He loved stories and games and elaborate make-believe. In a different era, he might have been a wonderful children's author who people smiled at indulgently. In the 1890s, he was an adult man who played elaborate pirate games in Kensington Gardens with 5 small boys and somehow made it seem completely natural. The boys were the Llewelyn Davies brothers, George, Jack, Peter, Michael, and Nico, whom Barrie met in Kensington Gardens while they were out walking with their nurse. Their parents, Arthur and Sylvia Llewelyn Davies, were initially cautious about the strange, small, intense man who kept appearing in the park. But Barrie was magnetic when he chose to be, and he was brilliant with the boys, and gradually he became part of the family. He told them stories. He played pirates with them. He invented Neverland. Not all at once, but piece by piece, game by game, afternoon by afternoon. The island where the lost boys lived, and no one ever had to grow up. Peter Pan first appeared in print in 1902, embedded in a novel called The Little White Bird. The full play, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, opened in London on December 27, 1904. The audience, which had arrived expecting a pleasant children's entertainment, sat in slightly stunned silence for a moment when it ended. Then they went absolutely wild. The play was unlike anything anyone had seen. Children flew across the stage. There was a fairy represented by nothing more than a moving light and the sound of a tinkling bell. There was a villain in a magnificent hat who was also somehow genuinely frightening. And there was this boy, this impossible, joyful, heartbreaking boy, who could do anything except feel things the way other people did. And here's where the story gets dark. Because while Barrie was writing Peter Pan, the Llewelyn Davies family was falling apart. Arthur Llewelyn Davies, the boy's father, developed cancer. He died in 1907, leaving Sylvia alone with 5 sons. Barrie supported the family financially and was now functionally a second parent. Then Sylvia developed cancer too. She died in 1910. Barrie became the boys' guardian. He was devoted to them. He was also, inevitably, the strange figure who had attached himself to their family and was now their only parent. A man who had turned their childhood games into the most famous story in the world, named the most famous character after one of them, and would never quite release them from the mythology he'd built around them. Peter Llewelyn Davies, the boy whose name Barrie used for his hero, grew up to loathe Peter Pan with a passion. He called the story that terrible masterpiece. He spent his life trying to escape being the boy who never grew up, and in 1960, at the age of 63, he died by suicide. Michael Llewelyn Davies, Barrie's favorite, the boy who he was closest to, drowned in Oxford in 1921 at the age of 20. Whether it was an accident or something else has never been definitively established. Barrie never fully recovered. The man who invented the boy who never grew up spent the second half of his life outliving the boys who inspired him. He died in 1937 and left the rights to Peter Pan to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London, where they remain to this day, funding the care of sick children in perpetuity. It was perhaps the most generous and most fitting thing he could have done. The boy who never grew up, taking care of children who needed him. And James Matthew Barrie, a small, strange, grief-shaped, brilliant James Barrie, was from Kirriemuir, Scotland. His birthplace is still there, preserved by the National Trust for Scotland, and if you walk those streets, you can feel the particular quality of Scottish imagination that runs through everything he wrote. The wildness, the melancholy, the refusal to be entirely tamed. Let's talk about what Peter Pan is really about. Let's talk about the actual story, because I think most of us know the Disney version, the green tights, the fairy dust, the cheerful adventure, and not the real one. The real Peter Pan is stranger and sadder and much more interesting. The story opens with the Darling family, Mr. and Mrs. Darling, and their 3 children, Wendy, John, and Michael. One night, Peter Pan flies through the nursery window, having come to retrieve his shadow, which has been kept in a drawer. He meets Wendy, teaches the children to fly, and takes them to Neverland. Now, Neverland is wonderful, obviously. The Lost Boys, the mermaids, the pirates, Captain Hook and his magnificent hat, all of it is glorious. But underneath the adventure, Barrie keeps returning to one theme again and again: what it costs to never grow up. Peter Pan has no memory. He forgets people almost as soon as they leave him. He forgets Wendy. He forgets the fairies who have died. He forgets. And this is the detail that breaks my heart every time. He forgets his own adventures, almost as soon as they're over. He can feel joy, but he cannot feel grief, because grief requires remembering, and Peter can't quite do that. He is, for all his freedom and joy and flight, profoundly alone. And then there's Wendy. Wendy is one of the most interesting characters in the story, and one of the most overlooked. She is practical, maternal, slightly too old for all of this, even at the beginning. She goes to Neverland and immediately starts mothering everyone, because Wendy has already begun the process of growing up. She wants a real home. She wants continuity. She wants people to remember her. Peter, heartbreakingly, cannot give her any of that. The novel's most devastating passage is near the end, when Wendy has grown up and has a daughter named Jane, and Peter comes back and doesn't recognize her. He thinks she must be Wendy's mother. When Wendy explained that she's grown up, that she couldn't help it, it just happened, Peter lets out a long, shuddering breath and leaves. He doesn't rage, he doesn't beg her to come back, he just goes, because Peter Pan doesn't process loss. He can't. It would require the one thing he refuses to do. Barrie was doing something rather radical for a children's story. He was writing about his mother. Margaret Barrie had clung to the image of David, the boy who never grew up, because growing up meant changing, and changing meant that the boy she loved so perfectly was truly gone. She couldn't bear it. So she preserved him. And Barrie, watching his mother love a frozen memory more than a living son, had understood something very dark about the human impulse to stop time, to keep things exactly as they are, to refuse to let go. Peter Pan is the dream of not growing up made real, and Barrie shows us with extraordinary gentleness that the dream is actually a tragedy. Peter is free, yes. He is joyful, yes, but he is also utterly, permanently alone. He will never have what Wendy has: the weight of memory, the richness of loss, the deep satisfaction of a life that moves forward. The crocodile with the clock ticking in its belly? That's time relentlessly pursuing Captain Hook. It pursues all of them. Peter is the only one who thinks he can escape it. He's wrong. And yet, this is what makes Barrie a great writer, rather than just a sad one. The story is also genuinely, gloriously fun. The Lost Boys are delightful. The pirates are magnificent. Tinkerbell is viciously jealous and fiercely loyal and absolutely herself. Captain Hook is one of the great villains of children's literature. Elegant, theatrical, obsessed with good form, terrified of that clock. The flying is real, the adventure is real, the joy is real. Barrie gives us both at once. The wonder and the heartbreak, the fight and the fall, the boy who can do anything and the boy who can feel nothing, and somehow holds them together without breaking either one. That is extraordinarily hard to do. Barrie makes it look effortless. Let's talk about his legacy and why it still matters. Peter Pan premiered in 1904. We are now well into the 21st century. The story shows no signs of going anywhere. Why? Partly because Barrie created one of the purest archetypes in literature. Peter Pan is the eternal child, the part of all of us that wants to stay exactly where we are, to not lose the things we love to the passage of time. Every adult who has ever felt a pang watching their children grow up, everyone who has ever wanted just a few more minutes in a place before leaving it forever, they all understand Peter. Partly because the story works on so many levels at once. Children love the adventure. Adults, coming back to it, find the grief. Both readings are valid. Both are in the text. But I think the deepest reason Peter Pan endures is this. It takes the thing we are most afraid of, growing up, losing people, running out of time, and wraps it in fairy dust and flight. It lets us feel the fear and the loss in a context that is safe, beautiful, and ultimately hopeful. Wendy grows up. She has Jane. Jane flies with Peter when Wendy can't anymore. And somewhere in that, Barrie is saying something achingly kind. The magic doesn't end, it just passes on. That every generation gets its own Neverland. That time is not the only thing that takes. It also gives. That is not a small thing to say. The adaptations have been extraordinary and various. There's the Disney version, cheerful and primary colored, and slightly racist. There's the 2003 film with Jeremy Sumpter, which gets the melancholy right. There's the stage play, which still moves audiences to tears at the moment when Peter asks whether children believe in fairies. There's Hook, which imagines a grown-up Peter who has forgotten everything, and which is, when you understand what Barrie was actually writing about, genuinely heartbreaking. And then there's the real Neverland, Kirrie Muir in the Scottish Highlands, where a small boy grew up in the long shadow of a dead brother and learned everything he would ever need to know about loss and imagination and the terrible necessary business of growing up. And of course, I've got some book recommendations for you today. You cannot do justice to Barrie without reading the original, and I mean the 1911 novel Peter and Wendy, not just the play. The play is wonderful, but the novel has Barrie's actual prose, and his prose is something else, witty and warm and quietly devastating. The chapter called The Mermaid's Lagoon is some of the most beautiful writing in children's literature. Read it, you'll not regret it. For Barrie's own voice in a different register, find a copy of his 1928 speech to the students of St. Andrews University, where my grandma went to university, Courage. He was their rector, and he gave his speech the year after Michael drowned, and it is one of the most honest and heartbreaking things a man has ever said in public. It's not long. It is unforgettable. For biography, the one I'd recommend is J.M. Barrie and the Lost Boys by Andrew Birkin, the definitive account of Barrie's relationship with the Llewelyn Davies family. Birkin had access to letters and diaries and family memories, and he tells the story with enormous care and without sensationalism. It will make you love Barrie more, and understand him better, and feel the weight of all those losses in a way that the play never quite conveys. The links to all of these will be in the show notes. I want to leave you with one image. In Kensington Gardens in London, there is a statue of Peter Pan. Barrie arranged for it to be installed in 1912 overnight, so that children walking in the park would find it as if it had simply appeared by magic, which, when you think about it, is exactly what Peter Pan would do. Children still leave flowers at the base of it. The boy, dreamed up in grief by a small Scottish man who spent his life trying to become someone he could never be, is still there in the garden, still flying, still refusing to come down. If you've never read Peter and Wendy, please do, and if you have, read it again. You'll find a different book than the one you remember, because you've grown up since then. That's the whole point. Thanks so much for listening to the Brit Lit Book Club. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to leave a review. It truly helps us reach more British literature lovers just like you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at The Book Club Tour, and head to our website, thebookclubtour.com, to see upcoming book club tours. Well, my tea's getting cold, so until next time, keep reading and stay curious.